This is Lana with Psychosomatic Alchemy, and today we dive deep into the fascinating world of psychological and mythical archetypes, weaving a tapestry that connects the dots from ancient myths to the eerie tales by H.P. Lovecraft, and ultimately to our own inner worlds. Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist, proposed that there are universal symbols and themes which reside in the collective unconscious of humanity, and they're usually personified as characters called archetypes. They are innate images inherited from our ancestors and shared amongst all humanity, regardless of culture or geography, and influencing our behaviors, dreams, and emotions. Jung never precisely clarified how exactly it is that archetypes are transmitted across generations. However, if we were to draw parallels between Jung's inherited archetypes and recent studies in epigenetics, there might be fascinating intersections to explore. For instance, research in epigenetics suggests that phobias and traumas and certain tendencies can be passed down to our offspring. This means that an ancestor can have an environmental experience that leads them to develop a phobia, and then somewhere down the line, that particular phobia can manifest for an offspring who wasn't even exposed to any such experience. And this phenomenon was observed among both humans and animals. Now, to connect this to Jungian archetypes, it follows that the collective experiences and traumas of our ancestors could influence the archetypal images and symbols within our collective unconscious. For example, collective fears and dangers experienced by our ancestors, such as fear of snakes and large predators, might be embedded in our collective unconscious as archetypal symbols, representing universal dangers or fears. Very likely, our shadow, which is considered an archetype, embodies these inherited fears and collective traumas, representing the darker, unknown aspects of our psyche. And this is where I'm particularly interested in exploring very deep primordial facets of my mind through investigation of Lovecraft's archetypes, the ancient ones, which I will discuss shortly. So these psychological archetypes have been personified through characters from myths and stories, such as the hero, like Hercules, or the magician, like Merlin, and so on. And these symbols have been passed down through generations, evolving from the earliest days when our ancestors sat around campfires sharing stories. These stories weren't just for entertainment, though. They served a profound purpose, teaching morals, values, and life lessons. By weaving tales of gods, monsters, heroes, and villains, our ancestors were in fact bestowing indirect guidance and advice about how we should conduct ourselves, what paths we ought to choose. These storytellers were shedding light on the strengths, weaknesses, desires, and fears that are deeply embedded in us, while giving us a clue about how to navigate these landscapes. Jung claimed himself how myths and stories, as well as rituals where these archetypes were embodied and enacted, played instrumental role for our human development, and how we humans lost something valuable when we shifted from primitive to our modern way of life. For instance, consider the archetype in the hero's journey. This pattern of adventure and transformation can be seen in countless myths and stories across cultures. From ancient Hercules to modern Harry Potter, such narrative structures speak to the innate human desire to overcome obstacles, to grow, and achieve greatness. And these stories point out that road to greatness comes through such things as generating courage, choosing correct course of action, abandoning greed and selfishness, and being propelled by love. When we read or hear these stories, we're not just being entertained, we're being guided, all while we're resonating with age-old patterns that mirror our own life's journey. Now, how is it that archetypes become alive in our psyche, affecting our behavior, tendencies, emotions, and even actions? Well, each archetype embodies a cluster of specific characteristics. Like hero, for example, would embody qualities like courage, strength, adventure, persistence, deep sense of right and wrong, impulse to protect the defenseless, and so on. So when we're moved by some circumstance, such as witnessing injustice, through some right activation of causes and conditions in our mind and our environment, what might happen is that hero archetype might come to life within our mind stream. meaning it arises its own cluster of qualities, and they flood our mind and cause us to feel feelings and generate behaviors. So we became outraged by injustice. We may feel a sudden surge of passion and enthusiasm, causing us to arise and act, perhaps speak out or take initiative for some cause, or maybe join a protest, etc. The thing with the archetypes is that they're totally autonomous, meaning they have a mind of their own. And when they arise, they possess our mind to such extent that our so-called free will is right out of the window. And they're like a compulsion that completely takes over. So in the above example, someone who is mostly quiet and introverted, when possessed by a hero archetype, can suddenly act in a way that is totally out of character for them. If we look at people who struggle with addiction, we can see that someone who's living in sobriety may suddenly relapse, just out of the blue and without necessarily being prompted by some negative external circumstance. And in spite of every good intention, no rational thought seems to have any hold in that moment. Person becomes possessed, and from there on, it's a one-track mind until the impulse is fulfilled. Now, this is a pretty good example of our shadow archetype, our dark passenger, the aspect of ourselves that has been disowned because it's formed from our shame, insecurity, and fear. It is unfulfilled and hungry, but most of all, very powerful and primal. And it is an unwelcome guest in every mind, because each and every one has a shadow. Shadow is a reservoir of parts that are mostly, but not always, problematic, and thus we repress them. Yet they don't go away, rather they recede into the domain of our unconscious, and from there they exert a great deal of influence on us, acting totally outside of our conscious awareness, hijacking our motivations, impacting our behaviors and reactions, and all for the purpose of finding expression. Sometimes these parts burst out into consciousness, and we get to see them fully expressed in our outer behavior, which usually results in our shame and regret, and leaving us to wonder, I don't know what has come over me. This is not who I am. And you're right, it's not you. It's one of your many archetypes, and it occupies your unconscious. It's at once a part of you and not quite you. This may sound disempowering, but don't worry, we're not helpless. We don't have to watch in horror as our problematic archetypes take over and destroy our life. Some of us indeed are more afflicted by certain dark archetypes than others, but there is an opportunity to get to know these aspects and befriend them, turn them into allies and learn from them. But this is a subject for another video. Now let's move on to the next juicy part. Howard Phillips Lovecraft, known as H.P. Lovecraft, was a mastermind of the early 20th century, crafting tales from 1917 to 1937. Born in 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island, and passing away in 1937, he penned stories steeped in cosmic horror and existential dread. Instead of conventional scares of his time, Lovecraft's narratives often explore the idea that humans are but insignificant specks in an uncaring universe filled with ancient, incomprehensible forces. The Ancient Ones, also referred to as the Elder Gods, are a pantheon of cosmic entities that pervade Lovecraft's mythos. These beings are beyond ancient, often predating the universe itself, and they exist in dimensions and realms beyond human comprehension. Now, these beings are indifferent to humanity, and their motivations, if they can be said to have any, are beyond human understanding. Lovecraft's stories often center on the idea that mere knowledge of these entities can drive a person to madness, as they challenge the very fabric of human understanding and significance in the universe. Like all archetypes, Ancient Ones, too, can correspond to aspects residing in our unconscious. But in this case, because they transcend our ordinary human qualities, following their trace, I believe, would lead us into deepest recesses of our psyche, possibly too far into pre-human origins, predating all our rational concepts, the parts of our mind that lead into the abysmal oblivion, the black hole of our unconscious. Now, that's perhaps going too far, thus severing our capacity to rationally analyze such depths. I imagine experiential meditative exploration might be more appropriate for such dimensions, though I wonder if these states of consciousness are even accessible for the most of us, say for certain Tibetan Buddhist yogis who have capacity to retain conscious awareness even in the state of deep sleep. But at the least, Lovecraft's entities such as Kalulu might lead us to the ungraspable, age-old irrational fears and impulses that have resided within humanity ever since we inhabited this planet. And Lovecraft's creatures could be seen as personifications of deep-seated existential anxieties, self-indulgent desires, and most primal instincts. They exist beyond our comprehension, reminding us of the vast unknown that lurks within ourselves and the universe. In essence, the ancient ones mirror the mysteries and shadows of the human psyche, pulling us into a realm where reality and imagination blur. Now, could the formidable Kalulu correspond to nature's overwhelming power and indifference to humanity? Or is he instead a personification of preconscious void, the deep unawareness, a sort of eternal solitude and silence where senses meet no object, where there is total absence of light and awareness? Or the polar opposite of this, a devastating overwhelm of the senses wherein one is burdened with constant and eternal surge of sensory data, so dense, loud, pervasive, and incomprehensible that it obliterates all meaning. Or finally, perhaps it simply personifies something deeply primal, like capacity for pure evil, total indifference, an absolute lack of meaning and connection. Do such dimensions really exist in the deepest, most ancient recesses of our mind? And if so, these are the things which we must eventually confront on our path to integration and spiritual transcendence. So then, could we find the courage to befriend these Lovecraftian archetypes, turning them to allies, and letting them guide us back to our dark origins, wherein, with the light of our awareness, we can once and for all liberate these archaic parts trapped in darkness? I will continue to explore and report back. After all, this is the teaching of ancient alchemists, that the most abhorred, profane, impure substance is the very basis of the highest, most sought out, and most precious substance in the world. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.